Today, we're diving into a plan from the American Civil War that was so audacious, so brilliant, it really should have changed the course of the war. But instead, it became an absolute tragedy. This is a story of the Battle of the Crater, a moment of incredible innovation and, well, catastrophic failure.
You know, when the top general of the entire Union Army, Ulysses S. Grant himself, says something like that, you know the story's going to be grim. So what on earth went so terribly wrong to get a reaction like that out of him?
This is it. This is the scene of the disaster on July 30th, 1864. It was supposed to be this incredible, war-ending breakthrough, but as you can see, it turned into an absolute charnel house. How did such an ingenious plan lead to this much carnage?
Okay, so to really get what happened, you have to understand the situation. It's the summer of '64. The Union and Confederate armies are dug in, staring at each other across 20 miles of trenches around Petersburg, Virginia. It was just a miserable, bloody stalemate, and General Grant was desperate for a way to break it. And out of that desperation comes this truly wild idea. A guy named Lieutenant Colonel Henry Pleasants, who is actually a mining engineer before the war, he looks at the Confederate trenches and thinks, the solution isn't to go over them, it's to go under them. And here's the plan. It's just so audacious. His guys, the 48th Pennsylvania, a lot of them were coal miners in civilian life. They would dig a tunnel over 500 feet long right underneath a key Confederate fort. The idea? Pack it with a massive amount of explosives, blow a giant hole in the enemy line, and then just pour Union troops right through the gap.
You have to understand, the way they pulled this off was an engineering marvel. High command barely gave them any tools or support, so the men had to get creative, hauling dirt out using old cracker boxes. But the ventilation system, that was pure genius. They built a fire at the base of an exhaust shaft which drew the stale air out, and that vacuum, in turn, pulled fresh air all the way down the tunnel. It was brilliant, and it kept the whole thing secret.
And what did they put at the very end of that long, dark tunnel? 8,000 pounds of gunpowder. That's 4 tons of explosives sitting quietly right underneath the Confederate army.
Now, the explosion was just part one. The plan for the attack that followed was just as carefully thought out. A division of United States Colored Troops, or USCT, under a General Edward Ferrero was specifically trained for 2 weeks. They knew exactly what to do. Rush forward, but go around the crater, not into it, and capture the high ground just beyond.
But then, just one day before the attack, the plan got thrown out. Instead of those specially trained USCT soldiers, a totally unprepared and unbriefed white division was chosen, basically by drawing straws. And to make things so much worse, their commander, General James Ledlie, was known throughout the army for being incompetent and a coward. This one last-minute change set the stage for total disaster.
So why? Why on earth did they change the plan? Well, Grant later explained it came down to a grim political calculation. General Meade, one of his commanders, was afraid that if the attack failed, they'd be accused of just using black soldiers as cannon fodder. It was a decision totally tangled up in the prejudices of the time. The awful irony of this so-called protective measure would become tragically clear very, very soon.
Okay, so in the pre-dawn darkness of July 30th, the fuse is lit. The army waits and waits. A half hour goes by. Nothing. The fuse has gone out somewhere inside that 500-foot tunnel. The whole operation is about to fall apart. But then, 2 incredibly brave volunteers crawl back into that dark, powder-filled tunnel. They find the break, relight the fuse, and scramble out for their lives. The clock ticks past 4:40, and then, at 4:44 a.m., the whole world just erupts.
The explosion was just immense. It tore a hole in the earth 170 feet long and 30 feet deep. It vaporized 278 Confederate soldiers instantly. The Confederates who survived were in total shock and disarray. Part 1 of the plan had worked perfectly. And this is what was left. This gaping chasm where a fort used to stand. The door to Petersburg was literally blown wide open. The Union had a golden opportunity right in front of them to end the siege.
But then came the fatal error. The new lead division, the one that wasn't trained for this, had no idea what to do. So instead of going around the crater like the USDT troops were supposed to, they saw this giant hole and charged straight down into it, creating this crowded, confused, helpless mob at the bottom.
You know, the shock of the Confederates didn't last long. When they saw the Union soldiers trapped in this giant pit, they regrouped fast.
They surrounded the rim of the crater and just started firing down into the mass of men. The perfect breach had become a perfect death trap.
When the USCT division was finally sent in as reinforcements, they just got trapped in there too. And that's when the Confederate counterattack took on a horrific racial dimension. Survivors reported hearing this chilling order being shouted. Black soldiers who were trying to surrender were often executed right on the spot.
So where was the Union leadership in all this chaos? Well, General Ledlie, the guy who was supposed to be leading the charge, was later found cowering in a bunker well behind the lines, drunk. And incredibly, the USCT commander, General Ferrero, was right there with him. The chain of command had completely and utterly collapsed.
And the human cost of this failure was just staggering. Almost 3,800 Union casualties to less than 1,500 for the Confederates. And as you can see in the note, the black soldiers of the USCT suffered the most. They were victims of a failed plan and then victims of battlefield atrocities. Well, after a disaster like this, the finger-pointing started immediately. General Burnside, the overall commander of this part of the line, was relieved of command, his career basically ruined. General Ledlie was kicked out of the army for good, but the real damage was already done. The best chance to take Petersburg was gone.
If you go to the Petersburg National Battlefield today, you can still see it, the crater. It's just this quiet, grassy depression now. A permanent scar on the landscape and a silent monument to a day of incredible bravery, catastrophic failure, and just immense tragedy.
So the story of the crater leaves us with this really tough question. You have a brilliant plan. You have heroic soldiers who pulled off an engineering miracle. But it all fell apart in an instant. It really forces you to ask, what is the true cost, not just of failed leadership, but of one single terrible decision?